Hello and welcome to the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your social media feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
And I'm Vivi Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Brotherless Night.
Sugi, I've been thinking a lot about Tyrone Slothrop recently.
That's wonderful for you. I feel like you're trying to intimidate me by referencing Pynchon, but won't work. Not intimidated.
Are you sure? I'm not done yet.
You can't break me. Why would you be thinking about the main character of Gravity's Rainbow just like just casually?
Because fascism.
Care to elaborate? I mean, I remember Tyrone Slothrop as an American soldier who got erections every time a German V-2 rocket went off.
Need I say more?
Of course you can say more.
Okay, I'll say more. What if it turns out that Thomas Pynchon has been writing about the fascist world that we're living in right now and the fascist tendencies of Americans for his entire career? Not only that, but he has a new book out on that very subject, and his novel Vineland was the source material for Paul Thomas Anderson's recent movie One Battle After Another.
And to tackle that topic, we are happy to be joined by Ana Gavrilovska, who has a brilliant new article in Current Affairs about Pynchon's critique of fascism in his novel Shadow Ticket and in his work generally. Ana lives in Detroit and writes most frequently for Uncut magazine. Her work includes album reviews, book reviews, artist profiles, and more. Ana, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We're very glad that you could join us. Your Current Affairs article is titled, Thomas Pynchon Saw American Fascism Coming, at which point Sugi texted it to me immediately. I agree. But before we get into the why and how, and how Pynchon's work prefigures our politics today, could you... Okay, this is a really stupid question. Sounds like this would be easy. Could you give our listeners a brief outline of his career, which has been really long and hard to outline at all, but at least just some markers in there. How old is he now? You said he was 88 now, which blew my mind. When did he start publishing? How much do we know about his personal life? Give us a little Pynchon primer.
So, as you mentioned, he is 88 years old now. Thomas Ruggles Pynchon Jr. is his full name. He began writing in the 1950s, the late 1950s. So he was born into a middle-class family in Long Island in 1937, and he started writing in high school. So as I think many writers do, kind of experimenting with short stories and getting published and doing all in school outlets and different things, and experimenting with a lot of the things that he would be employing throughout his career in sort of the goofier aspects, I think, of his work, because I think as a young person that he was kind of in the way that younger work can sometimes be. So he goes to Cornell to pursue a degree in engineering, which is kind of where I think everything starts unfolding from what he's going to end up exploring throughout the rest of his work. So goes to Cornell for a couple years. He enlists in the Navy, and he spends time on the warship USS Hank during the Suez Crisis. And by 1957, he's back at Cornell, but now he's decided he's getting out of engineering and he's going to pursue writing. He's going to get a bachelor's of arts in English. And his first job is as a technical writer for Boeing. So that is like where his intimate knowledge of aeronautics and the defense industry and all of these things that he goes on to explore in great depth throughout all of his work. It all, in my opinion, starts from that time at Boeing as his technical writer. And then he is, at that point, he's just kind of off, and he spends a few years writing his first novel, V. That comes out in 1963. Just to briefly touch on what V...
V was the first book that I read. I got it when I was like a kid for some reason. Yeah. It was, I mean, It's a crazy Pynchon novel, but I liked it because it had a lot
Yeah.
about jazz in it. There was like the 5-note jazz club. I haven't looked at it in a long time, but I remember his writing about music being important to me in that book.
And that's a whole nother thing I didn't even barely begin to touch on in my article, is how music kind of works in how he incorporates music and jazz particularly, because just to jump ahead, jazz is a part of Shadow Ticket. It's something I didn't get to talk about in the piece, but I think there's kind of something to the exploring freedom through jazz as a counterpoint to fascism. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. But the only thing I wanted to say about V, because there's too many details about all of his books to even really I can't spend time about them. But part of V, if you recall, follows like a mysterious female character who shows up at moments of great violence in history. And so I think there's and that's who the V is. And I think just from the beginning, we can already see he's drawn to these moments of time where, drawn to trying to maybe not understand, because I don't know that any of us can fully understand any of this, but he's obviously interested in systems in general, how the world works and how people,
but also hidden systems.
Yes,
secret systems
exactly.
That explain
Yes.
what our outer reality, that are working behind the scenes to sort of make things operate, and that you have to find out what those secret systems are in order to truly understand what's happening, if you ever can.
And that's a great lead into his next book, which is The Crying of Lot 49, which is about a secret postal society that a character gets sucked into trying to figure out what is going on with this alternate postal
Thurn and
system,
Taxis.
I guess. What's that?
Isn't it called Thurn and Taxis, if I'm remembering it correctly?
I'd have to double check.
I'm remembering it correctly. That's what it's based on a real thing. There was really
yes, exactly.
such a place and such a postal service.
And that's the other thing that's always in his work, and something that I've noticed. So much of it is based in real things that that feel like he's making them up, but he's not. He's pulling from reality. This alternate postal I keep wanting to say postal service because of the band, but I don't know if is that the right way to phrase it?
We'll go with it.
Let's go with it. Yeah, let's go with it. So that's real. There's in Shadow Ticket, there's like a cheese syndicate, and there's when I was working on my piece, I came across something about so he describes it. I'm jumping way ahead here into Shadow Ticket, but he describes the year 1930 as the 1776 of the cheese business. And that's really because Lever Brothers, the British company, merged with a Dutch cartel known as the Margarine Union, and they formed Unilever, which is a real company that we all use their packaged goods all the time. So it's just all of the strangeness and the goofiness in his work and all of the darkness, it's all he's pulling from real history, real events. And I sort of got totally carried away into that question.
Well, let's get to Gravity's Rainbow.
Let's talk about that,
exactly. That's the next book, right? That's
yes.
73.
So that's probably his most famous book. And that, for our listeners who might not be familiar with it, it's a World War II novel. And that suggests that German and American corporations were actually in cahoots about the war. And he writes, and this is a quote, "Don't forget the real business of the war is buying and selling." And so we normally think of World War II as America and its allies fighting against fascists. But is this book really the beginning of his argument that America and American capitalists have actually always been friendly to fascism?
I certainly think so. Though I will preface this by saying I don't feel, like an expert on this, necessarily. So obviously there's a lot of stuff, a lot of historical stuff that I don't know fully. But from what
Rainbow is no way to be an expert on the whole thing. I feel like if you pick certain things to focus on, like I taught a class on it once, and all we talked about was like the things that reference World War I in that book. Yeah, and like that was a whole class.
And that still, it probably could have been, longer. But the thing that I think comes out of that, or the way that I think about him drawing those lines is American capitalists during World War II, like there's a lot of discussion to be had about how there's an element of causing chaos and disruptive markets, like American capitalism being very friendly to the disruptive markets that are caused by Nazi Germany. And before, before it was very clear that there's a side that we're not crossing, lots of American companies were working with Nazi Germany. I mean, they're like, lots of car companies were more than happy to export vehicles. There's all of this business going on between the two. So, he's definitely that is something that there's always all this hypocrisy in our society that he's talking about in his work. And that's certainly huge part of Gravity's Rainbow, and kind of
seems like there might be some people prepared to profit over the war that we're having with Iran right now in similar ways, maybe with people who we normally think of as our enemies, like the Russians, who were visiting the Capitol today with a bunch of Republican lawmakers, those fucking idiots. Anyway, go on.
Unbelievable. I was just going to add that under fascism, business leaders are not under threat, so they have no incentive to stop any of this. And I think that that was happening before Nazi Germany became the Nazi Germany that we think of now as a fascist evil that everyone was obviously against at the time, because what we're experiencing now, you would think that everyone would be on the same side here, and obviously we're not. So it's very easy to remember. I feel like it's very easy to remember or to think of Nazi Germany as a big bad that everyone was in agreement with, but that obviously wasn't true at the time, and that's just how we remember it now.
I feel like the best books about World War II are the ones that deconstruct the way that we think about it. We were the good guys, I mean, Joseph Heller's Catch-22 is another book that is very similar to that, in the Milo Minderbender character, and the way that he uses the war as war profiteering feels a lot similar to the characters in Gravity's Rainbow, who are also making bank on the war. So, all right, he writes this great book. There's a lot of controversy about it. As you mentioned in the article, like the Pulitzer Prize Committee is so offended by certain parts of the book, which make perfect sense, by the way, particularly the one with the guy eats poop. That's because he was it's because he commanded troops in World War I in the Passchendaele, and it makes him remember that. That's what Passchendaele smelled like. It's not made up stuff. Anyway, that's just an aside.
Exactly.
That's from my
class. More of that, though. Yeah.
So 17 years go by. And then he publishes Vineland in the 90s, one of the most famous silences in American literary history. We're going to move ahead to that novel. Could you talk to us about that book and how it extends and sharpens Pynchon's critique of the American love of and tendency toward fascism?
Yes. So Vineland takes place. So it was published, I think, in 1990 or 1991, maybe like early 90s. And it takes place in 1984, California, and it is basically it goes back and forth in time from the 60s to the 80s, and it shows it does a lot of things, but the way that it
let's just tell the readers the characters' names first, and then and then we'll set up the plot, and then that'll tell us what the book is about.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Going way too
Zoid was the character.
Yeah.
Character.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do the count in thing and start over. from talking about the characters. Actually, I'm just going to start the whole thing over. So
Sounds
from good. what you said about talking about the book. Okay. 3, 2, 1. So Vineland, published, I think, in 1990, takes place in 1984, California. It follows a guy named Zoid Wheeler and his daughter, Prairie. They live a somewhat underground life because they're hiding from Brock Vaughn, who's a federal agent who may or may not be Prairie's real father. Their link is Prairie's mother, character named Frenessy Gates, and she is kind of the fulcrum of the novel. The character is searching for her because what happens is her and Zoid meet in the 60s. He's like kind of like a stoner hippie playing music at bars. She is part of a political collective, a radical like revolutionary film collective where their whole thing is like documenting all instances of civil rights abuses against people and, using the camera as a gun, that kind of thing. And so she ends up embroiled in a relationship with Brock Bond. And that is sort of the American fascist attraction and her character represents that. And she ends up being exploited by him and used, and then she has to go underground. And then she disappears. Zoid and Prairie are on their own, moves over to the 80s. Reagan is, that effects of that are happening, and then Brock comes back. And then basically I would say that's like the gist of the novel in terms of plot.
So in your article, you quote an amazing passage in Vineland about government power. And I wonder if you could set up that section of the novel and then read that passage to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point in the story, Bernetzi has been underground for some time, and she has hooked up with another, I guess they're informants.
They're like informants, right? Like marking on people who are, they get involved in people who are using drugs or selling drugs and then turn them in.
Exactly. And so because of that, they rely on the government that's how they get paid, is through their informant work. And so she realizes that something is going on when they're not able to cash their checks. And so she drives around a bunch of different places trying to figure out how no one is willing to cash this check. And so I'll start reading now. It was there, gazing down a long aisle of frozen food, out past the checkout stands, and into the terminal black glow of the front windows, that she found herself entering a moment of undeniable clairvoyance, rare in her life but recognized. She understood that the Reaganomic axe blades were swinging everywhere, that she and Flash were no longer exempt, might easily be abandoned already to the upper world and any unfinished business in it that might now resume. As if they'd been kept safe in some time-free zone all these years, but now, at the unreadable whim of something in power, must re-enter the clockwork of cause and effect. Someplace there would be a real axe, or something just as painful, Jasonic, blade to meat final. But at the distance she, Flash, and Justin had by now been brought to, it would all be done with keys on alphanumeric keyboards that stood for weightless, invisible chains of electronic presence or absence. If patterns of ones and zeros were like patterns of human lives and deaths, if everything about an individual could be represented in a computer record by a long string of ones and zeros, then what kind of creature would be represented by a long string of lives and deaths? It would have to be up one level at least. An angel, a minor god, something in a UFO.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That passage, I read this book again to prepare for this interview. I hadn't read it in such a long time. And we're going to talk about the movie later. By the way, you'll notice that none of the names are the same. There's lots of differences. So that's one thing we'll say ahead of time. But this book, reading it, made me think of so many things that are happening right now. Doge, for instance, or all this talk about AI agents who are going to take over people's jobs. The purging of voter rolls, the arguments about, the taking of the voter rolls from Fulton County, Georgia by the DOJ, surveillance through social media. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Pynchon's conception, which I guess he does the same thing in Gravity's Rainbow, but he starts thinking about computers in this novel, this idea of what you call technofascism and how that prefigures and anticipates our present day.
So one of the things that I was thinking about when I wrote the piece that I didn't get to delve into too much is the idea of how we understand fascism and how the modern imagination is a bit limited when it comes to what we think is fascist. And that relates to this because I think that what he is getting at and what is happening now is these forms of coercion are already happening and have been happening, and they've been intruding on our everyday lives through like these AI agents, or just like we're surveilling ourselves on social media. We put our information out there constantly. I mean, we're doing the work. We're doing the work of the panopticon for them. We're putting it all out there. And I think that, so when I talk about technofascism in the piece, that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And I think that from back to the 70s when he's working at Boeing, I mean, he had an early look at how the way that the computers and technology were going to change everything. And so I think that he couldn't help but, show up in his work.
So when I was thinking about Vineland and also watching one battle after another, I was kind of thinking about, I wrote my journalism school thesis on literature of the Weather Underground, which was kind of on my mind. And obviously, Paul Thomas Anderson also thought that Vineland was relevant to the present day because he used it as the source material for one battle after another in a kind of interesting way where, like, maybe if you didn't know that, you would have a hard time figuring out how the two relate to each other. How did you feel about PTA's adaptation?
Well, this is what I'll say. I think that Pynchon uses families to write about politics in Vineland and in his other work, and PTA uses politics to tell stories about families.
Oh,
I think PTA.
I think he's about that.
Yeah, I think he's much less interested in systems, and I think. I was going to say the whole computer techno part that we were talking about, and the way that prefigures the self-surveillance that's going on. And I was going to add, just like, when you're saying like we have an old dated version of fascism, like we think of it as the Stasi or like some secret police that are informing on people. But you're saying, no, this is happening with the system, the technology that we're using, which is what Pynchon's writing about. That's not really in the one battle after another at all. Not at all. And I think he sort of, if you were to do like a one-to-one comparison, like you could say maybe he replaced that with white supremacy, because he's much more interested in that aspect of modern, I guess you could call it fascism, or, our modern world. I think he finds that. I think he was more interested in that. But I also think that for him, it was more, I do think it was more set dressing than commentary on society. I don't know. That might be a hot take. I'm not sure. There's a lot of. I didn't think the movie was nearly as interesting to me as the book as the book was when I went back to read it. Yeah. And the differences are, I mean, it's important. The Zoid character is similar to whatever in the hell the guy's
whatever
Bob, I
Vincent
think.
DiCaprio
Bob.
plays, whatever his
Yeah.
name is. What's
Pat Bob.
Bob?
Yeah, Bob and then Pat. Yeah. Everyone has multiple names. It's all,
And then the wife, the Frenesi character, is
Perfidia Beverly Hills.
Perfidia Beverly Hills. Okay, so she gets a Pynchon-esque name.
Yeah, very much
She's black, right? And then the character in Vineland is white. And the character in Vineland, Frenesi, she is she likes being fascist. Like, she enjoys. There are passages where she talks about her attraction to the simplicity of what she's doing, as opposed to like the drug culture she'd been involved. So she's like really a convert. You don't really get that sense from Perfidia Beverly Hills, who like is being basically blackmailed because she wants to protect her daughter. It seemed like to me. Am I reading that correctly?
I agree with you about Perfidia. I don't know that I think, because I don't know that Frenesi. She's a very interesting character. I see her as more of a symbol. So I don't know that I don't think that I see her as a symbol of an attraction to fascism rather than her character's actions being sort of literal or like, I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I feel like in the movie the characters are much more human, and I think in Pynchon's work they're more they're more I mean, I already said symbol, but I think he's more interested in critiquing sort of society at large rather than telling a story about what's going on through this one woman's head when she's sleeping with a cop.
This is the one that I was thinking of this is from 72 on Vineland, where she's talking about switching over, and she says, like, here was a world of simplicity and certainty, no acid head, no revolutionary anarchist would ever find, a world based on the 1 and 0 of life and death, minimal, beautiful, the patterns of deaths and lives. And that's her thinking about like her informant world. And it seems a lot like that passage that you read earlier too.
Yeah.
Right? She has an attraction to that kind of minimalist, what I would call fascist kind of like, yes or no, live or die kind of thing. A lack of messiness.
I guess you're sort of making me, I'm also kind of like just wondering, listening to you about like what films are, like I think books are much better at critiquing systems than films are broadly. This is a dangerous thing to say perhaps, but what you're saying also kind of makes me wish like Boots Riley had adapted this book.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we'll get more adaptations from other people because there's just so much there. There's so many different ways the story could have been taken, and I think that I also think Paul Thomas Anderson's own, life. He's married to Maya Rudolph, a Black woman. He has children with her, so I think like that element of it is obvious. It's obviously autobiographical, and to sort of jump ahead. I'm not sure, but. The endings are completely different. I mean, in my view, the ending of Vineland is dark, and it is a Prairie who in the film, her character's name Willa, is basically yearning for Brock Vaughn to show up again. He's about to abduct her, and then he gets the funding for his program gets pulled, which is also funny in a different way because even like the fascist is going to lose his funding at the end of Vineland. But then he disappears, and she's kind of like hoping that he comes back. And so that's like that attraction that comes through from her mom, that comes through from the, the idea of the American pull to this authoritarianism. Whereas in the movie, she's like, it's this sort of like sweet, fun, oh, the kids are going to save us. Like, sorry, we left you a screwed up world, but at least, you're going to the protest. And it's just not at all, I think, what is going on in Vineland. So, yeah,
we should say, just for clarity, that the Brock Vaughn character in Vineland is the sort of the equivalent of the Stephen Lockjaw character in the movie. Again, given a Pynchonian name, but that's not actually a name from the book itself. Okay, so that brings us to Shadow Ticket, which was actually the reason you wrote this article, I assume, since that's the book that came out most recently. Came out in 2025. It's Pynchon's first novel in 12 years. Its protagonist, Detective Hicks McTaggart, the recipient of the titular shadow ticket or secret assignment, sets out for Europe to find Daphne Airmont, the daughter of Bruno Airmont, the Al Capone of cheese, which we've previously mentioned. In the article, you say that the Airmonts are not particularly subtle proxy for the Trumps. Could you talk about that? There's some pictures that involve the similarities. Just like give us a sense of this, of how Pynchon is writing about Trump in this book.
So the Airmonts in Shadow Ticket, the first reason that I thought they're obviously a proxy for the Trumps is he describes this photograph of the character Daphne Airmont sitting on her father's lap, and they both have these kind of looks on their faces, and it is like word for word, basically a description of a photograph of Donald Trump and Ivanka when she was a teenager. And it's just so clear that we're meant to connect these two. And Bruno Airmont in the book, he is so the Al Capone of cheese, it goes in exile and he is on the run. So that part is obviously not, Trump is our president. He can't go on the run, but
well, it's
I'm sure
give him time.
But yeah, exactly. So their relationship is creepy, that element is there. But then the character of Bruno is described as he's childish and angry, and he does things just because he can, and people listen to him just because he has power, not because he's correct. And that it's just exactly the kinds of things that we say about Trump. Oh my God.
So there's a particular spot here that I just want to quote related to what you're saying, where another character is talking about him and says, "How insulting to me personally to be mentioned in the same breath with this feeble impersonation of a crime boss, to waste my talent not on an evil genius, but on an evil moron, dangerous not for his intellect, what there may be of it, but for the power that his ill-deserved wealth allows him to exert, which his admirers pretend is will, though it never amounts to more than the stubbornness of a child." I'm like reading this, I'm like screaming, I'm just...
That's what I was looking for. I'm so happy you found it. That's the exact section I was looking for.
There it is.
Yes, my note said, find the quote about how he's a big angry child. And that was it. That was exactly it. So yeah, I just from those two things alone, it's just like very clearly a Trump proxy. And then there's like a whole nother thing that we really probably don't even have time to talk about, where he, at the end of Shadow Ticket, Bruno Airmont kind of gets possibly taken to another timeline where something called the business plot of 1933 may have actually occurred. And that was basically an event that really happened or almost happened. It would have happened, but there's a bunch of people, there are doubts as to how serious this thing was, but
allegedly real history or book history?
Real history. There was a supposed plot that a bunch of business leaders at the time were trying to take down, I think, FDR.
Yeah,
that's right. And the person that they tried to have them help do this, I believe his name was General Smedley Butler, and he had a change of heart, and he basically told on them instead of like committing whatever crimes they wanted to commit. And of course, they were all like, we didn't really do anything. We're not going to do anything. Like, he's crazy. And so he was kind of discredited. And then he spent the rest of his life being very against all of the terrible things that he had to do in war, that he like had a real change of heart. And so in the book, it's kind of in Shadow Ticket, he kind of has you think that the Bruno Airmont character ends up is taken to a different reality where the business plot came through, and all of the fascist business leaders can kind of have their little fascist world in a different timeline somewhere else. And Donald Trump is just to say, he just seems like a person who would have been involved, his actions and his politics and everything. He would fit right in with these guys.
So speaking of Trump, now we've been talking about him for a while, and in much of Pynchon's career, he's been talking about American fascism on the horizon. It's easy to argue that it's here now, and also attraction to authoritarianism. I mean, I wouldn't accept somebody like Putin as also part of this sort of critique. And he wrote most of Shadow Ticket, much of Shadow Ticket under, the awareness of Trump as a president. What does it mean to read Pynchon as a warning versus, as you put it at the end of the article, it's happening now. It's maybe too late to escape. How's this book different than his earlier work, and are we in a different readership for it?
So I think part of the way that it's different is that, and to go back to something you said earlier about how he's not just interested in systems, he's interested in hidden systems. I think so much of everything is just less hidden now. We are just able to see the framework of things more. We have the tools that's more readily available to kind of not only witness like atrocities, because that's obviously another thing. Like, we're a culture that can see terrible things that are happening as they're happening, as opposed to, at the time when he was writing most of his other work, we didn't have that technology. So I think that's like one of the biggest differences to me, that our world now versus then. But also, you would think that, well, if we can see more, then we would be doing more to stop it. But entwined in that is like to bring the techno-fascist thing back into it, we're more isolated than ever. We're more like, it's so much easier to live in your own bubble than ever before. So I think that I use the terms I talk about it as being a warning, but I also think there's an element of it's too late, like way too late, obviously, in many, many respects, but gone.
Oh no, I'm thinking of, there's a passage late in the book where I was like, oof, this is like, he has reached his hand out to like throttle me personally. Like, there's two characters having a conversation, and then he talks about the conversation they should be having. And he's really not talking about them. He's talking about like me specifically, and like all of the things I should be doing with my life to stave off exactly this kind of authoritarianism, and how they're having this kind of like ordinary conversation, and they should be like facing the problem directly, but they aren't, and they can't, and they won't, and it's too late, and like the lights are all going out, and oh, that passage was like just brutal. And I think really speaks exactly to what you're saying. It's this moment when he sort of comes out of the shadows, where he's been pulling the strings of the story, and he's a little bit of a voice of God at the end of this late chapter, where it's kind of the so-called hero Hicks McTaggart, who's having that conversation. You'd think he would have, I don't know, like risen above or something at this point, and he's still failing to kind of say what needs to be said. Anyway, like also late in the book, Daphne and Bruno go to the movies to see a feature called Bigger Than Your Stomach. And last night, my husband's a film scholar. He was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm looking up the 1931 film Bigger Than Your Stomach." He's like, "I'm not sure that exists." And I spent some time, given the various real life proxies that we're talking about, to be like, what is this movie? Is there a version of it? But as far as I can tell, it is a Pynchon invention. And I wonder if you would mind reading that passage for us.
The feature they're here tonight to see is Bigger Than Your Stomach, 1931, the latest hit starring child sensation Squeezita Thickly, which is about, well, eating, actually. Back in the States, every showing of this movie, no matter where, has collapsed well before the second reel into civic disorder. Screens across the nation presently inscribed with knife scars, fork tracks, spoon indentations as audiences, many of whom haven't seen a square meal since the start of the Depression, sent into collective chuck horrors by giant images of turkeys, roasts, tenderloin steaks, and birthday cakes, pots of soup big enough to swim in, go running up to physically assault the screen, hoping in some magical way to forcibly enter the paradise of eats being so meanly denied them, only reluctantly pausing when Squeezita, adorable as always, comes marching into the shot with a determined twinkle in her eye, brandishing a sidearm and swinging dimpled little fists back and forth and singing in 3/4. Ooh, eating, eating. My, what a thing to do when it's peanut butter and jelly time, right down in your belly time. Who'd ever want to stop eating? Pass that banana cream pie. Oh my. You don't want conversation? Well, neither hee do I when we're eating. Oh my God. I can't believe I did that. A pot of soup approached from overhead, now smoothly lap dissolving into a giant swimming pool full of bathing beauties, bordered by palm trees and food pitches, offering an array of snacks from roast turkey drumsticks to deluxe hot dogs smothered in sport peppers and dripping green-blue pickle relish strangely aglow, even though the movie's supposed to be in black and white, and gigantic Italian sandwiches quite a few feet long, and glutton-sized ice cream extravaganzas, and oh, well, that sort of menu. Soon enough, however, the music has shifted grimly minor, as overhead now looms a giant soup ladle, about to dip down and scoop up one or more of the aqua lovelies, as if, in the distant world from which the ladle has descended, they are considered edible delicacies. The girls cast theatrical glances skyward, scream, squeal, submerge in the soup, trying to escape, yet smiling all through the shot, having just the greatest fun, while pretending to croon in tight inside the octave harmony.
Thank you. That's such a very typical, like, Pynchon riff, you know? I mean, even from way back in the singing, that routine of having people break into song in the middle of nowhere is, like, in all of his books. And fake bits of media, but that, like, the fascist imagery there is like, it's like torturing the people with beautiful food that they can't have, people literally trying to eat it, and then, like, making the people look like they're going to get eaten. There's sort of a gruesomeness that's also a part of fascist iconography that's part of the movie. And I've been thinking so much about when I first encountered Pynchon. I should say, like, my first editor, Ray Roberts, worked with Pynchon. Like, he convinced him to publish Slow Learner, which was a collection of some of his earlier pieces. And then he was the editor for Vineland and Mason and Dixon. So I've like heard Ray talk about working with Tom, as he would call him. And like, well, maybe I'll tell some stories about that later. But when I read Slow Learner when I was in high school, and I read V and that stuff early on, and I was like, what is happening? This is so weird. People would never act this way. It's so cartoonish. And he's thought of as a postmodern, like a non-realistic type writer, you know? And yet, reading this now and thinking about the people in the Trump's White House, thinking that we have like a president who's like decided to tear down the East Wing and build a ballroom, who wants a triumphal arch. We have an FBI director who wears like tennis shoes that have his name with a $sign inscribed on them that he's made specially for himself. You know, that is Pynchon's world. And it seems like he was anticipating the world we're in far more realistically than a supposedly realistic novel that was big in the 90s called like Primary Colors, which was written by Anonymous that later became Joe Klein. Like, that book's not read. That book is not relevant anymore about the Clinton administration. But this is. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and I'd never even heard of Primary Colors, so that kind of tells you something about how hasn't made that kind of impact. But in terms of one of the things you had mentioned, Doge, earlier, and I wanted to bring it back into the realism, non-realism conversation, because Doge as a acronym, the Department of Government Efficiency, and then the acronym is, you know, a meme coin. that's pure Pynchon. I mean, he loves ridiculous acronyms. A couple this was cut from my piece, so I'm going to share it here. A couple of my favorites are Pisces and Gravity's Rainbow, which stands for Psychological Intelligence Schemes for Expediting Surrender. And then in Shadow Ticket, we got Smegma, which is Semi-Military Entity Greater Milwaukee Area. And I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks Doge is even more ridiculous than either of those two, and yet it's real. It's gone now. I can't believe it.
Elon Musk is your typical like Pynchon evil genius character.
Yeah.
I mean, he would. Yeah. It's like Pynchon wrote him into existence in some ways,
like a buffoon. But real quick, I wanted to say one more thing about the fake film and the images of food. There is something, I think there's something there where it feels similar to some of the AI slop that we see online now, where we're kind of looking at, like, we're being, especially like these sort of videos of like 80s and 90s nostalgia and like, look at how the world used to be and don't you miss this world? And that feels like a modern version of this movie, like teasing people with something that they can't have, but at the same time, that in a distorted and grotesque way that isn't even it's not what we actually want.
That is, I see these posts on X that always say, "Don't ever forget they took this from us." And it'll be some image of some guy like painting or something, doing some sort of presumably. And what's so fucked up about that, like, and fasci, is like, who is they? They never say who is they. Why can't you go paint a picture in a meadow right now? Like, why was that taken from you? It hasn't been. It's just like this weird assertion that something has been lost is part of what Make America Great Again is. It's like that idea that somehow the people you don't like, have taken something from you. Like that is part of that AI slop, ethos that you're talking about.
Totally.
Ana, thank you so much for being with us today. We could talk about this forever, and perhaps we will continue offline, but we've got to stop for now. Listeners, don't miss Ana's work and her Substack, Six Sad Mother Slug, which you can find at motherslug.substack.com.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.